The wooden platform creaked beneath Josephine's worn boots as she clutched her 3-month-old daughter closer to her chest. The jeering crowd of men below making her stomach turn with dread and shame. It was August 1876 in Monticello, Utah Territory, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the makeshift auction block that had been erected in the center of town. Josephine Kane had never imagined her life would come to this, standing like livestock while men appraised her worth with calculating eyes. Her husband Thomas had died 6 weeks ago in a mining accident, leaving behind nothing but debts she had no way to pay. The bank had taken everything, and the creditors had decided the only way to recoup their losses was to sell her labor contract along with any possessions she had left. Somehow, in the twisted logic of desperate men seeking payment, that included her. "We got ourselves a young widow woman here," the auctioneer bellowed, his voice carrying across the dusty main street. "Strong, healthy, can cook and clean, comes with a baby girl 3 months old. Someone's gonna get themselves a ready-made family and a hard worker. Who'll start the bidding at $50? Josephine felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Her daughter Lily squirmed against her, making small mewing sounds that threatened to turn into a full cry. The baby needed to be fed soon, needed to be changed, needed to be anywhere but here in this blazing sun with strange men discussing them like cattle. $50, called out a gruff voice from the back. Josephine recognized him as Ben Tucker, a rancher known for working his hired hands to the bone and paying them next to nothing. $60, countered another man, this one a saloon owner whose establishment she wouldn't even walk past if she could help it. The bidding continued, climbing higher as Josephine stood frozen, trying to make herself as small as possible. She was 22 years old, had been married for barely 2 years, and now found herself being sold like property because her husband's creditors wanted their money, and the law saw nothing wrong with auctioning off a debtor's family to settle accounts. $200. The voice that rang out was different from the others. Deeper, steadier, with an authority that made the crowd turn to look. Josephine lifted her eyes from where she had been staring at her daughter's downy head and found herself looking at a tall man standing at the edge of the crowd. He wore a dark hat pulled low, dusty trail clothes, and had the weathered look of someone who spent his life outdoors. Even from this distance, she could see his eyes were a striking blue-green color, fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. $200 going once, the auctioneer said, clearly pleased with how the price had jumped. Anyone willing to go higher, the crowd murmured, but no one spoke up. $200 was more than most men made in 6 months. It was an absurd amount to pay for a labor contract, even one that came with a woman and child. Going twice, the auctioneer continued. The tall stranger didn't move, didn't look away from Josephine. There was something in his gaze that wasn't like the others, something that made her feel less like an object and more like a person he was trying to communicate with silently. Sold to Ethan Mills for $200. The crowd began to disperse as the stranger, Ethan Mills, stepped forward. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. As he approached the platform, Josephine could see more details. He was probably in his late 20s, with dark hair just visible beneath his hat, sun-bronzed skin, and a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. There was a kindness in his eyes that seemed at odds with the hardness of his features. "You can come down now," he said quietly when he reached the platform. His voice meant only for her. Josephine's legs felt shaky as she descended the steps, one hand gripping the railing while the other held Lily securely against her. When she reached the ground, she found herself standing mere feet from the man who had just purchased her contract. The reality of her situation crashed over her again, making her dizzy. "I need to sign some papers," Ethan said, not unkindly. "Then we'll get you and the baby somewhere out of this heat. When did she last eat?" The question surprised Josephine so much that she answered honestly. "About 2 hours ago. She'll need to nurse soon." He nodded as if this was perfectly normal information to be discussing with a stranger. "There's a boarding house just down the street. Mrs. Henderson runs it. She'll give you a room to tend to the baby while I finish up here." "Can you make it that far?" "I can make it," Josephine said, lifting her chin despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, might have been respect. "Good. It's the building with the green door. Tell Mrs. Henderson I sent you and I'll be along shortly to settle the bill." He turned toward the auctioneer's table without waiting for a response, leaving Josephine standing in the street with her baby and more questions than answers. But Lily was beginning to fuss in earnest now, and the promise of a cool room where she could tend to her daughter was too appealing to ignore. She hurried toward the boarding house, her worn skirts kicking up dust. Mrs. Henderson turned out to be a pleasantly round woman in her 50s with kind eyes and no-nonsense manner. When Josephine explained that Mr. Mills had sent her, the woman's eyebrows rose, but she asked no questions, simply showed Josephine to a small but clean room on the second floor. "I'll bring up some water and a bit of bread and cheese," Mrs. Henderson said. "You look like you haven't eaten in a day or more." "Thank you," Josephine managed, her throat tight with unexpected kindness. Alone in the room, she finally let herself sink onto the narrow bed. Lily was crying in earnest now, her little face red with hunger and discomfort. Josephine unbuttoned her dress with trembling fingers and let her daughter nurse, the familiar comfort of the act bringing tears to her eyes. How had everything gone so wrong so quickly? Just 3 months ago she had been in her own home, holding her newborn daughter with Thomas beside her, both of them filled with hope for the future. Now Thomas was dead, buried in the Monticello cemetery, and she belonged to a stranger who had paid $200 for the privilege. Mrs. Henderson returned with a tray of food and water, setting it on the small table by the window without comment. After she left, Josephine forced herself to eat, knowing she needed to keep up her strength for Lily's sake if nothing else. The bread was fresh and the cheese sharp and tangy. She ate mechanically, her mind racing with possibilities about what would happen next. An hour passed before there was a knock on the door. Josephine had managed to change Lily using the last clean cloth she had, and the baby was now sleeping peacefully in her arms. She opened the door to find Ethan Mills standing in the hallway, his hat in his hands. "May I come in?" he asked. It was such a strange question given the circumstances. He owned her contract, could command her presence anywhere he wished, yet he was asking permission to enter the room. Josephine stepped back, allowing him inside. He was even taller than she had realized, having to duck slightly to pass through the doorway. The room suddenly felt much smaller with his presence filling it. Ethan glanced at the sleeping baby in her arms, and something softened in his expression. "She's a pretty little thing. What's her name, Lily?" "That's a good name." He moved to the window, looking out at the street below rather than at Josephine. "I suppose you have questions about what happens now." "You paid $200 for a labor contract," Josephine said, trying to keep her voice steady. "That's far more than I'm worth, even with Lily included, so yes, I have questions." He turned to face her then, those blue-green eyes meeting hers directly. "You're not property, Mrs. Kane, no matter what happened in that street today. What was done to you was wrong, and I won't pretend otherwise." "Then why did you buy the contract?" "Because if I hadn't, someone else would have, and I didn't like the look of the other bidders. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I have a ranch about 10 miles outside of town. It's a decent-sized operation, enough to keep me and my hands busy. I could use help with the house, that's true enough. But I'm not looking for a servant, Mrs. Kane. I'm offering you and your daughter a place to stay, food to eat, and safety. In return, you help with cooking and keeping the house. It's a fair arrangement, nothing more. Josephine searched his face for deception, for the catch that had to be there. Men didn't pay $200 out of pure goodness. And if I refuse, then I'll rip up the contract right now and you're free to go. He said it so matter-of-factly that she almost believed him. But where will you go, Mrs. Kane? Do you have family in the territory? Money saved somewhere? She didn't answer because they both knew she had nothing. If she had anywhere else to go, she wouldn't have been on that auction block to begin with. I have a sister in California, she said quietly. But I haven't heard from her in 3 years. I don't even know if she's still at the same address. Ethan nodded slowly. Then here's what I propose. You come out to the ranch with me. Give it a trial period, say 3 months. If at any point you want to leave, I'll give you enough money to get to California and try to find your sister. If you decide to stay, we can work out a proper wage arrangement. The contract I just paid for will be destroyed either way. Why would you do that? Josephine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't know me. I could rob you blind and disappear in the night. A hint of a smile crossed his face. Could you? With a 3-month-old baby? I'd like to see you try. The smile faded. Look, Mrs. Kane, I know what it's like to be alone in the world with nowhere to turn. Someone helped me once when I needed it. I'm just passing that kindness forward. Lily stirred in Josephine's arms, making a small sound before settling back to sleep. Josephine looked down at her daughter's perfect little face and thought about the alternatives. She could take her chances on the street, try to find work in a town that had just watched her be auctioned off like livestock. She could accept whatever charity she could scrape together until it ran out. Or she could trust this stranger who was offering her something that seemed too good to be true. 3 months, she heard herself say. Trial period. 3 months, Ethan agreed. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, the contract the auctioneer had made him sign. Without ceremony, he tore it in half, then in quarters, letting the pieces fall to the floor. That's done then. We'll head out first thing in the morning. The ride is a few hours and I'd rather make it during the cooler part of the day. Mrs. Henderson has agreed to put you up for the night and I've already settled the bill. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Mrs. Kane. You both belong with me now at the ranch. But that doesn't mean you belong to me. There's a difference and I need you to understand that. You're under my protection, not my ownership. That clear? Josephine nodded, not trusting her voice to speak. Ethan settled his hat back on his head and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Only then did Josephine let out the breath she had been holding, sinking back onto the bed with Lily still secure in her arms. Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams of Thomas and the life they had planned together. She woke several times to feed Lily, staring out the window at the dark street below and wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. But when dawn broke and she heard Ethan's quiet knock on the door, she gathered up her meager belongings and followed him downstairs. He had a wagon waiting outside, a sturdy-looking thing with a canvas cover to provide shade. The bed was filled with supplies he must have purchased in town. Sacks of flour and beans, tools, and what looked like several bolts of fabric. I took the liberty of picking up a few things you might need, Ethan said, helping her up onto the wagon seat. I noticed you were traveling pretty light. There's cloth there for making clothes for yourself and the baby and some other essentials. Josephine didn't know what to say. In the past 24 hours, This man had paid $200 for her contract, torn it up, provided her with room and board, and now was outfitting her with supplies. It was overwhelming in its generosity. The ride out to the ranch was quiet at first. The sun climbed higher in the sky, but the canvas provided blessed shade. Lily slept in Josephine's arms, lulled by the gentle rocking of the wagon. The landscape around them was beautiful in its harsh way. Red rock formations jutting up from scrubby desert floor, patches of sage and juniper dotting the terrain. In the distance, she could see mountains rising up, their peaks still touched with snow even in August. "How long have you had the ranch?" Josephine asked finally, breaking the silence. "About 5 years now," Ethan replied, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. "Bought it with money I saved working cattle drives up from Texas. It was just a claim with a half-finished cabin when I got it. Built it up from there. You work it alone. I have 2 hands who help with the cattle and horses. Good men, both of them. They have a bunkhouse on the property. The main house is just me." He paused. "Just me until now, I suppose." Josephine digested this information. Will they mind? Having a woman and baby around, Jack and Samuel. They'll probably be thrilled to have some decent cooking for a change. We've been taking turns with meals and none of us are particularly skilled in that department. He glanced at her. "I should warn you, the house is nothing fancy. It's clean and sturdy, but it's a bachelor's home. Might need a woman's touch to make it feel more comfortable. I'm not expecting fancy, Mr. Mills. I'm just grateful for a roof over our heads." "Ethan," he said, "if we're going to be living under the same roof, might as well use first names." "What do people call you?" "Josephine." "Most people call me Josie," she admitted. It was what Thomas had called her, what her sister had always used. Hearing it now brought a familiar ache to her chest. "Josie," Ethan repeated as if testing how the name felt. "That suits you." They fell back into silence, but it was more comfortable now. Josephine found herself studying Ethan from the corner of her eye. He had strong hands on the reins, calloused from hard work. There was a scar on his right hand, a thin white line that ran from his thumb to his wrist. His profile was striking. Straight nose, strong jaw, the kind of face that spoke of determination and resilience. He wasn't classically handsome in the way Thomas had been, with his easy smile and boyish charm. Ethan was harder, more weathered, but there was something compelling about him nonetheless. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, and Josephine felt her breath catch. It was more than she had expected. A solid 2-story house made of logs and stone, a large barn, several outbuildings and fenced pastures where horses grazed in the morning sun. The house had a wide porch wrapped around the front, and someone had planted flowers in beds near the steps, though they looked a bit worse for wear from lack of attention. "My mother planted those flowers before she passed," Ethan said, following her gaze. "I've tried to keep them going, but I'm not much of a gardener." He pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake, then came around to help Josephine down. His hands were gentle as he steadied her, careful not to jostle the baby. 2 men emerged from the barn as they approached, both stopping short when they saw Josephine. "Jack, Samuel, come meet Mrs. Kane and her daughter Lily," Ethan called out. "They'll be staying with us from now on. Mrs. Kane is going to help with the house and cooking." The 2 ranch hands approached cautiously. Jack was older, maybe in his 40s, with graying hair and a weathered face. Samuel was younger, possibly around Josephine's age, with sandy hair and an easy smile. "Pleased to meet you, madam," Jack said, touching the brim of his hat. "Having someone who can actually cook around here will be a blessing." "Don't let them fool you," Ethan said. "They can manage when they need to. They just prefer not to." Samuel grinned. "Why would we cook when the boss here is offering to bring in professional help? Pleasure to meet you, Mrs." Kane, and that's a beautiful baby you've got there. Josephine found herself relaxing slightly. There was nothing threatening about these men, just honest ranch hands who seemed genuinely pleased to have her there. Thank you, and please call me Josie. Ethan led her into the house while Jack and Samuel started unloading the wagon. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took a moment for Josephine's eyes to adjust. When they did, she found herself in a large main room with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. There was a kitchen area on one side, a dining table with chairs, and some comfortable-looking furniture arranged near the fireplace. Everything was clean but sparse, lacking the small touches that made a house a home. "Your room is upstairs," Ethan said, heading for a staircase on the far wall. "There are 3 bedrooms up there. I use the one on the left. The other 2 are empty, so you can pick whichever you prefer." He led her up the stairs to a hallway with 3 doors. He pushed open the door on the right, revealing a good-sized room with a large bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the pastures. It was simple but comfortable, more room than Josephine had dared to hope for. "This one gets the morning sun," Ethan said. "The other room gets the afternoon light, whichever you prefer." "This one is perfect," Josephine said, moving to the window. From here she could see the mountains in the distance, the pastures closer in, the whole sweep of the ranch spread out below. It was beautiful and peaceful, so different from the cramped quarters she had been living in after the bank took her house. "Good. I'll have the boys bring up your things and the supplies. There's a cradle in the attic that my mother made. I'll bring it down and you can use it for Lily." He started to leave, then paused in the doorway. "Josie, welcome home." The words hit her unexpectedly hard, bringing tears to her eyes. She blinked them back quickly. "Thank you, Ethan." After he left, Josephine stood in the middle of the room holding Lily, trying to process everything that had happened in the past day. Yesterday morning she had woken up in a tiny rented room, facing the auction that would decide her fate. Now she was standing in a comfortable bedroom in a ranch house, with a man who seemed determined to treat her with kindness and respect despite having paid for her contract. It was too much, too fast. She knew she should be more cautious, should keep her guard up against whatever catch there must be. But standing there with the sunlight streaming through the window and her daughter warm in her arms, she allowed herself a moment of hope that maybe, just maybe, things would be all right. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Josephine threw herself into making the house more livable, partly because it needed doing and partly because it gave her something to focus on besides her uncertain situation. She cleaned from top to bottom, made curtains from some of the fabric Ethan had bought, and started organizing the kitchen in a way that made sense. The cooking was easier than she had expected. Ethan, Jack, and Samuel had simple tastes and were so grateful for decent food that they praised everything she made, even her first attempt at biscuits, which came out a bit too hard. She quickly established a routine. Up early to make breakfast for the men before they headed out for the day, caring for Lily and doing household tasks during the middle hours, then preparing dinner for when they came back in the evening. Ethan was gone most of each day, working the ranch alongside Jack and Samuel, but he made a point of coming back to the house around midday to check on her and Lily. These visits were never long, just 15 or 20 minutes, but Josephine found herself looking forward to them. He would wash up at the pump, accept whatever she offered him to eat, and ask how her morning had gone. Sometimes he would hold Lily while Josephine ate her own lunch, the sight of this rough cowboy cradling her tiny daughter with such care doing strange things to her heart. "She's getting bigger already," Ethan commented one afternoon about a week into her stay. Lily was draped over his shoulder, making small cooing sounds, growing like a weed. "She's eating well," Josephine said, watching them together. "I think she likes it here. She seems more settled than she was in town." "Babies can sense things," Ethan said. "She probably knows she's safe." The word hung in the air between them. Safe. It was true, Josephine realized. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt safe. She slept through the night without jerking awake at every sound, without that constant knot of anxiety in her stomach. The ranch felt protected from the world, a haven where she and Lily could heal. "Can I ask you something?" Josephine said impulsively. "That day at the auction, why did you really bid on the contract? And don't tell me it was just about needing help with the house. You could have hired someone for far less than $200. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his hand gently rubbing Lily's back as she nestled against his shoulder. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. "My mother was in a situation like yours once, a long time ago. My father died when I was just a baby, left her alone with debts and no way to pay them. She was from back east, had no family out here. A man named Robert Mills offered her work on his ranch, gave her a place to live and a way to support us both. Eventually they married, and he raised me as his own son. He was the only father I ever knew." He looked up at Josephine, his eyes holding a depth of emotion she hadn't seen before. "Robert died 3 years ago. Before he passed, he told me the story of how he met my mother, how he saw her struggling and knew he had the power to help. He said it was the best decision he ever made. When I saw you up on that platform, holding your baby and trying so hard to be brave, I thought about my mother. About how different my life might have been if Robert Mills hadn't been the kind of man to step up when he saw someone in need." Josephine felt her throat tighten. "So you were paying it forward, in a way." He stood carefully, transferring Lily back into Josephine's arms. "But I'll be honest with you, Josie. It wasn't entirely selfless. This house has been too quiet since Robert died. It's been just me rattling around in here, and sometimes that gets pretty lonely. Having you and Lily here, it makes the place feel like a home again, so maybe we're helping each other." He settled his hat back on his head and headed for the door. "I should get back to work. We're moving some cattle to the upper pasture this afternoon. I'll be back for dinner." After he left, Josephine sat with Lily, thinking about what he had revealed. It explained so much about his actions, about the gentleness beneath his rough exterior. He wasn't trying to own her or control her. He genuinely wanted to help because someone had once helped him. The knowledge settled something inside her, made it easier to relax into her new life. She found herself singing while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her. She took more care with the meals, wanting to make sure Ethan and the hands were well fed. She started working on the neglected flower garden, watering the struggling plants and pulling weeds, pleased when they began to perk up. One evening about 2 weeks into her stay, Josephine was cleaning up after dinner when Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway. Jack and Samuel had already headed back to the bunkhouse, and Lily was asleep upstairs in the cradle. "Leave those," Ethan said, nodding at the dishes. "Come sit on the porch with me for a bit. It's a nice evening." Josephine dried her hands on her apron, surprised by the invitation. They had shared meals and conversation, but always with the boundaries of employer and employee clearly defined. This felt different, more personal. The porch was indeed pleasant, with a cool breeze cutting the heat of the day. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Ethan settled into one of the wooden chairs and gestured to the other. Josephine sat, very aware of the intimacy of the moment. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something," Ethan said. "You've been here 2 weeks now. How are you finding things? Honestly." "It's good," Josephine said and meant it. Better than I expected. You've been very kind to us, all of you. But, Ethan prompted, clearly hearing something in her voice. Josephine hesitated, then decided honesty was best. But I don't know what I'm doing here long term. The 3 months will be up eventually, and then what? Do I stay? Do I go? I need to be able to support myself and Lily, but I don't know how to do that beyond cooking and cleaning, and those jobs don't exactly pay enough for a woman alone to make a real living. Ethan was quiet, looking out at the sunset. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. What did you do before you married? Did you have any training? I worked in a dress shop for a while. I'm good with a needle, can make and mend clothes, but that's not much better paying than cooking. What about teaching? Can you read and write? Of course I can, Josephine said, a bit indignant. My father was a school teacher back in Missouri. He made sure I had a good education. Then you could teach, Ethan said. Monticello needs a school teacher. The last one left 6 months ago, and they haven't found a replacement. It would pay a real wage enough to support yourself and Lily if that's what you wanted. The idea sent a thrill through Josephine. Teaching would give her independence, a respectable position in the community. But I have no experience teaching, and who would watch Lily while I worked? You'd figure it out. As for experience, you have education, and that's more than most people around here can claim. I could put in a word with the town council if you're interested. Why would you do that? Josephine asked. If I became a teacher, I could afford to leave here. I wouldn't need to stay at the ranch. Ethan turned to look at her fully, his eyes reflecting the last rays of sunset. Because I want you to stay because you choose to, not because you have no other options. Does that make sense? It did, in a way that made Josephine's heart do strange things in her chest. This man who barely knew her was actively working to give her choices, to make sure she had the freedom to decide her own future. It was so contrary to everything she had experienced in the past months that she hardly knew how to process it. I'll think about it, she said quietly. The teaching, I mean. No rush. The offer stands whenever you're ready. He stood, stretching. I should let you get some rest. Lily will probably be up in a few hours wanting to eat. She's very regular about that, Josephine agreed, rising as well. They stood there for a moment, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, could smell the scent of leather and sun-warmed cotton that clung to him. Something passed between them, a spark of awareness that made her breath catch. Ethan took a step back, breaking the moment. Good night, Josie. Good night, she managed, her voice coming out softer than intended. She watched him head into the house, heard his footsteps on the stairs as he went to his room. She stayed on the porch a while longer, her mind racing. When had Ethan Mills stopped being just her benefactor and become something more? When had she started noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strength in his hands, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to Lily? It was too soon, she told herself firmly. Thomas had only been dead for 2 months. She was still grieving, still processing everything that had happened. Whatever she was feeling toward Ethan was just gratitude, nothing more. It had to be. But as she went upstairs and checked on Lily sleeping peacefully in her cradle, as she got ready for bed in the comfortable room Ethan had given her, she couldn't quite convince herself that gratitude was all it was. The next few weeks brought a subtle shift in the dynamics of the household. Josephine became more comfortable in her role, putting her own stamp on the house and routines. She made new curtains for the main room, bought chickens with money from the egg and butter fund Ethan had set up for her, and started a vegetable garden near the kitchen door. The house began to feel lived in, warm, the kind of place that welcomed people home at the end of a long day. Ethan seemed to notice the changes, often commenting on small improvements. You've made this place feel like a real home again, he told her one morning, gesturing at the fresh flowers on the dining table, the smell of bread baking in the oven, the general air of comfort that now pervaded the house. Lily was growing rapidly, becoming more alert and responsive. She had started smiling, and Josephine's heart melted every time she saw Ethan coax one of those gummy grins from her daughter. He was wonderful with the baby, patient and gentle in a way that suggested he would make an excellent father someday. The thought gave Josephine pause. Was Ethan married? Had he been? In all their conversations, he had never mentioned a wife or sweetheart. She realized she knew very little about his personal life beyond what he had told her about his parents. She got her answer unexpectedly one afternoon when a woman came calling. Josephine was in the kitchen making preserves when she heard a knock at the door. Opening it, she found a beautiful woman in her mid-20s, elegantly dressed in a way that made Josephine suddenly conscious of her own simple work dress and flour-dusted apron. "You must be Mrs. Kane," the woman said, her tone cool and assessing. "I'm Catherine Porter. I'm here to see Ethan." "He's out with the cattle," Josephine said, feeling oddly defensive. "I don't expect him back until this evening. I'll wait." Catherine swept past her into the house without waiting for an invitation. She looked around the main room, her eyes taking in all the changes Josephine had made. "My, you have been busy. The place looks quite different." "I try to keep it nice," Josephine said carefully. "Can I offer you some tea while you wait?" "That would be lovely." As Josephine prepared the tea, Catherine settled into one of the chairs near the fireplace, her posture perfect, her dress arranged just so. She was exactly the kind of woman who would make a suitable wife for a successful rancher. Well-bred, pretty, poised. "How long have you been working for Ethan?" Catherine asked as Josephine brought over the tea. "About a month now. And you have a baby, I understand." How interesting that Ethan would take in a widow and child. He always did have a soft heart. There was something in her tone that suggested this was not entirely a compliment. Before Josephine could respond, they heard horses outside. Through the window, she could see Ethan riding up with Jack and Samuel. He dismounted and headed for the house, stopping short when he saw the unfamiliar horse tied at the rail. He came inside, his expression shifting when he saw Catherine. "Miss Porter, this is unexpected." "I was in the area and thought I would stop by," Catherine said, rising gracefully. "It's been too long, Ethan." "Has it?" Ethan's tone was polite but not warm. "Josie, thank you for entertaining Miss Porter. You didn't need to go to the trouble." "It was no trouble," Josephine said, sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. "I should check on Lily." She escaped upstairs, but not before catching the assessing look Catherine gave her. From the bedroom, she could hear the murmur of voices below but couldn't make out words. Lily was awake in her cradle, making soft sounds. Josephine picked her up, grateful for the distraction. About 20 minutes later, she heard the front door close and footsteps on the stairs. Ethan appeared in her doorway, looking tired. "I'm sorry about that," he said. "I should have warned you that Catherine sometimes stops by uninvited. It's your house. You can have whoever you want visit," Josephine said, trying to keep her tone neutral. "Catherine and I knew each other years ago. Her father owns the ranch that borders mine to the north. We were engaged briefly, but it didn't work out." He leaned against the doorframe. "She's never quite accepted that it's over." "Why did it end?" Josephine asked, then immediately felt intrusive. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business. It's all right." "It ended because she wanted a husband who would expand his holdings, become a powerful rancher with political aspirations. I just wanted to work my land and live a quiet life. We wanted different things." "She's very beautiful," Josephine observed, hating how small her voice sounded. Ethan's eyes met hers. "She is, but beauty isn't everything. I learned that the hard way." He straightened up. "I should go clean up for dinner. Will you need any help with Lily? We're fine." Josephine assured him. After he left, she sat holding her daughter, processing what she had learned. Ethan had been engaged before, to a woman who was everything Josephine was not: wealthy, sophisticated, connected. What did that say about what he was looking for? And why did she even care? She was his employee, nothing more, regardless of the strange awareness that seemed to spark between them sometimes. But as she went downstairs to prepare dinner, she couldn't help putting a bit more effort into her appearance, smoothing her hair and changing into her better dress. When Ethan came to the table, his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than usual. "You look nice," he said simply. "Thank you," Josephine replied, feeling warmth creep into her cheeks. Dinner was pleasant, with easy conversation flowing between Ethan, Josephine, Jack, and Samuel. But Josephine was very aware of Catherine's visit, of the revelation that Ethan had been engaged before. It added a layer of complexity to their relationship that she wasn't sure how to navigate. Over the following weeks, Catherine became a semi-regular visitor to the ranch, always with some excuse for stopping by. She was never overtly rude to Josephine, but there was a dismissiveness in how she treated her, as if Josephine was merely part of the household staff and not worth serious attention. Ethan, for his part, was always polite but distant with Catherine, making it clear through his actions, if not his words, that he wasn't interested in rekindling their relationship. But Catherine persisted, and Josephine found herself feeling increasingly unsettled by the other woman's presence. The situation came to a head one afternoon when Catherine arrived while Ethan was gone and made herself comfortable in the main room. Josephine was baking pies, flour up to her elbows, when Catherine wandered into the kitchen. "You really have made yourself indispensable, haven't you?" Catherine said, watching Josephine work. Ethan was always a sucker for a damsel in distress. First his mother, now you. Josephine kept her hands busy rolling out pie dough, refusing to let Catherine see how the words stung. "I earn my keep. I'm not a charity case." "Of course not," Catherine said smoothly. "But you must realize this is just temporary. Eventually, Ethan will want a real wife, someone who can give him children and help him build something lasting. You're just filling a gap until that happens." The words hit harder than they should have, mainly because they echoed Josephine's own fears. What was she doing here? Playing house with a man who had rescued her out of pity, deluding herself that the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her meant something more than kindness. "I think you should leave," Josephine said quietly, her hands stilling on the dough. "Excuse me. This is Ethan's house and he's not here. It's not appropriate for you to be here alone with me. If you want to see him, you can come back when he's home." Catherine's eyes narrowed. "You're getting awfully territorial for a hired woman, and you're getting awfully familiar for a former fiancé who was dismissed." Josephine met her eyes steadily. "Please leave." For a moment, Catherine looked like she might argue. Then she swept out of the kitchen, her skirts swishing with indignation. Josephine heard the front door slam, then hoofbeats as Catherine rode away. Only then did Josephine let herself sink into a chair, her hands shaking slightly. Had she just made a terrible mistake? Would Ethan be angry that she had sent Catherine away? She found out that evening when Ethan came home for dinner. She served the meal quietly, waiting for him to mention Catherine's visit. But he said nothing until Jack and Samuel had left for the bunkhouse. "I ran into Catherine on the road this afternoon," Ethan said casually. "She seemed upset, said you asked her to leave." "I did," Josephine admitted. "I'm sorry if I overstepped, but she came when you weren't here and I didn't think it was appropriate for her to stay." Ethan studied her for a long moment. "Did she say something to you? Something that upset you?" Josephine hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "She reminded me that I'm just temporary help, that eventually you'll want a real wife and family. And you believed her?" Ethan asked, his voice very quiet. "I don't know what to believe," Josephine said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I don't know what I am to you, Ethan. Am I an employee, a charity case, a temporary convenience? Because Catherine is right about one thing. Eventually you'll want more than this, and where does that leave me and Lily?" Ethan pushed back from the table and stood, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You really don't see it, do you?" "See what?" He crossed to where she sat, pulling her to her feet. They were close now, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "See that I'm half in love with you already. That every morning I wake up grateful that you're here. That watching you with Lily, seeing you make this house a home, has been the best thing in my life." Josephine's breath caught. "Ethan, I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "I know you're still grieving your husband, and I would never pressure you or make you feel obligated. But you asked what you are to me, and I'm telling you the truth. You're not temporary, Josie, not to me." Her heart was racing, her mind spinning. She should pull away, should maintain the professional distance that had kept things safe. But looking into his eyes, seeing the raw honesty there, she couldn't deny what had been growing between them. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Thomas has only been gone 3 months. What kind of wife mourns so briefly? The kind who had her world turned upside down and found someone to help her stand again," Ethan said gently. "Grief doesn't follow a schedule, Josie. And feeling something for someone new doesn't mean you didn't love your husband. It feels like betrayal, or it feels like survival." His hands came up to cup her face, his touch achingly gentle. "I'm not asking you to forget him or to rush into anything. I'm just asking you to know that I'm here and I care about you, and when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I would be honored to court you properly." Josephine felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "You paid $200 for my contract, and you want to court me properly? Don't you think we're a bit past that?" A smile tugged at his lips. "Maybe, but you deserve to be courted, Josie. You deserve flowers and compliments and all the things a woman should have when a man is trying to win her heart. What if you already have it?" The words slipped out before she could stop them, but she didn't regret them. It was true. Somewhere in the past weeks, Ethan Mills had worked his way into her heart with his quiet kindness, his gentle strength, his way of making her feel valued and protected. His eyes darkened with emotion. "Then I'm the luckiest man alive." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she didn't. When his lips met hers, it was soft and sweet, a question more than a demand. Josephine melted into it, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart beating steady and strong beneath her palms. When they pulled apart, both breathing a bit harder, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "We'll take this slow as you need. But know that I'm serious about this, about you, about making a life together if you'll have me." "I want that," Josephine said, the certainty of it surprising her. "I want it more than I thought possible." From upstairs came the sound of Lily starting to fuss. Ethan smiled. "She's got good timing, that daughter of yours." "She needs to be fed," Josephine said reluctantly. "Go take care of her." "We have time, Josie, all the time in the world." She went upstairs feeling like she was floating, her lips still tingling from his kiss. As she nursed Lily, looking out the window at the ranch bathed in moonlight, she allowed herself to believe that maybe she could be happy again. That maybe this strange twist of fate that had brought her to Ethan Mills's ranch was actually a blessing in disguise. The next morning, Josephine woke to find a small bouquet of wildflowers on her bedside table. She hadn't heard Ethan come in, but the flowers were unmistakably fresh, probably picked at dawn. A smile spread across her face as she brought them to her nose, breathing in their sweet scent. So the courting had begun. True to his word, Ethan took things slow. Over the following weeks, he found small ways to show his affection. Flowers left where she would find them, compliments on her cooking that went beyond simple appreciation, offers to watch Lily so Josephine could have a bath or a few moments to herself. He started sitting with her on the porch after dinner, the two of them talking about everything and nothing while the sun set. They shared their histories more deeply. Josephine told him about her childhood in Missouri, about meeting Thomas at a church social and falling for his easy charm, about the hope they had shared for their future before the mining accident took him. Ethan shared stories of his mother and Robert, of learning to work cattle, of the dream that had led him to buy this ranch and make something of his own. Robert always said a man should leave the world better than he found it, Ethan said one evening. I'm trying to do that with this place. Build something lasting, something that matters. You already have, Josephine said softly. You've built a home. That matters. His hand found hers in the darkness of the porch, fingers intertwining. It's more of a home with you in it. Jack and Samuel had quickly picked up on the changing relationship between Ethan and Josephine, but they were nothing but supportive. Jack, in particular, seemed pleased. About time the boss found someone, he told Josephine one afternoon when she brought lunch out to the men working in the barn. He's been alone too long. We're taking things slow, Josephine said, feeling her cheeks heat. That's wise. But I've seen the way he looks at you, madam. That man is smitten. Josephine couldn't help the smile that curved her lips. The feeling is mutual. 2 months into what Ethan jokingly called their official courting period, he asked Josephine to accompany him into Monticello for supplies. It would be her first time back in town since the auction, and she felt nervous about facing people who had seen her at her lowest point. You don't have to go if you're not ready, Ethan assured her as they prepared the wagon. But I think it might be good for you to hold your head high and show them you're doing just fine. He was right, Josephine knew. She couldn't hide at the ranch forever, and she had nothing to be ashamed of. I'll go, but I'm bringing Lily. I don't want to be away from her that long. Of course. We'll make a day of it. Maybe stop by the hotel for lunch, do our shopping, head home before dark. The ride into town was pleasant, with Lily happy in Josephine's arms and Ethan keeping up an easy stream of conversation. When they arrived on Monticello's main street, Josephine felt her stomach clench. But Ethan helped her down from the wagon with such care, such obvious regard, that she felt her courage return. I need to stop by the feed store, Ethan said. Why don't you take Lily over to the mercantile? I'll meet you there in a bit. Josephine nodded and headed across the street, very aware of the stares following her. She kept her head high, just as Ethan had suggested, and pushed through the mercantile door. Mrs. Jensen, who ran the store with her husband, looked up from behind the counter. Her expression was hard to read as she took in Josephine and the baby. Mrs. Kane, she said neutrally, what can I help you with? I need some thread and a few other notions, Josephine said, matching her tone. I'm making clothes for Lily. Mrs. Jensen's expression softened slightly as she looked at the baby. She's gotten big, healthy-looking child. Thank you. She's doing well. As Josephine browsed the thread selection, she was aware of Mrs. Jensen watching her. Finally, the older woman spoke. I heard you're living out at the Mills Ranch. I am. I help with the house and cooking. People are talking, you know, a young widow living with a bachelor rancher. Josephine turned to face her directly. Let them talk. Ethan Mills saved me and my daughter from a terrible situation. He's been nothing but honorable, and I won't hear anything against him. Mrs. Jensen studied her for a long moment, then nodded. He's a good man, that one. Robert Mills raised him right. You could do worse. It was as close to approval as Josephine was likely to get. She completed her purchases just as Ethan arrived. His hand settled on the small of her back as they left the store, a gesture of support and possession that didn't go unnoticed by the people on the street. They had lunch at the hotel restaurant, a surprisingly pleasant meal where the proprietress fussed over Lily and complimented Josephine's dress. Word seemed to be spreading that she was under Ethan Mills's protection, and people were adjusting their attitudes accordingly. "That wasn't as bad as I feared," Josephine admitted as they loaded their purchases into the wagon for the trip home. "You were brave," Ethan said. "I'm proud of you." The simple words of praise warmed her more than they should have. On the ride back to the ranch, Lily fell asleep and Josephine found herself leaning against Ethan's shoulder, comfortable and content. His arm came around her, holding her steady as the wagon rolled over the uneven road. "Josie," he said quietly, "I've been thinking." "About what?" "About us." "About the future." He paused. "Your 3-month trial period ends next week." Josephine's heart skipped. She had been so caught up in the developing relationship with Ethan that she had almost forgotten about the arbitrary deadline they had set. "I suppose it does." "I don't want you to go," Ethan said. "I know we agreed you could leave, that I'd give you money to go to California if that's what you wanted, but I'm hoping you'll choose to stay." "I'm not going anywhere," Josephine assured him. "California doesn't hold anything for me anymore. Everything I want is right here." She felt his sigh of relief. "Thank God, because I have something I want to ask you, but I didn't want to do it if you were planning to leave." Josephine pulled back to look at him, her heart starting to race. "What do you want to ask?" "Not yet," he said, a smile playing at his lips. "Soon, but not yet. I want to do this right." True to his mysterious promise, Ethan seemed to be planning something over the next few days. He made a trip into town alone, returning with packages he hid in his room. He had several hushed conversations with Jack and Samuel. Josephine found the whole thing endearingly transparent. On Saturday evening, Ethan asked her to put on her best dress and meet him on the porch after she put Lily down for the night. Curious and a bit nervous, Josephine complied. She wore the dark blue dress he had bought fabric for, which she had made herself. It wasn't fancy, but it fit well and the color brought out her eyes. When she stepped onto the porch, she caught her breath. Ethan had strung lanterns around the railing, casting everything in warm, golden light. He had cleaned up, wearing his best shirt and pants, his hair still damp from washing. He looked handsome and nervous, a combination that made her heart flip. "You look beautiful," he said, taking her hand. "You went to a lot of trouble," Josephine said, looking at the lanterns, at the flowers he had arranged in jars along the railing. "You're worth the trouble." He led her to the chairs, but instead of sitting, he knelt in front of her, still holding her hand. "Josie, I know we haven't known each other long, just over 3 months, but they've been the best 3 months of my life. You and Lily have brought light and love into this house, into my life, in a way I never expected." Josephine's eyes filled with tears as she realized what was happening. "I know your life has been hard lately," Ethan continued. "I know you've been through loss and pain and uncertainty, but I promise you, if you'll have me, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you feel safe and cherished and loved. Josie Kane, will you marry me?" From his pocket, he produced a ring. It was simple but lovely, a gold band with a small diamond. Later, he would tell her it had been his mother's, that Robert had given it to her when he proposed. Josephine felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Ethan, I'll marry you." His face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood, pulling her into his arms. When he kissed her this time, it was different from the first kiss they had shared. This was a promise, a commitment, the seal of a future they would build together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Josephine laughed through her tears. "I can't believe this is happening. 4 months ago I was being auctioned in the street. Now I'm engaged to the most wonderful man I've ever known." "You both belong with me now," Ethan said, echoing words from that first day. "And I belong with you. That's how it should be." They stood on the porch wrapped in each other's arms while the lanterns flickered around them and the stars came out overhead. Josephine had never imagined she could feel this way again after Thomas's death, had never thought happiness could find her in the midst of such tragedy. But here she was, loved and cherished, with a future that looked bright and full of promise. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Monticello. Jack and Samuel served as witnesses, and Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house threw together a small reception. Catherine Porter did not attend, but Josephine heard later that she had finally accepted reality and turned her attentions to a rancher from up north. Josephine wore a cream-colored dress she had made herself, and Ethan looked handsome in his Sunday best. Lily, now 6 months old, made small, happy sounds throughout the ceremony, as if she approved of the proceedings. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed Josephine with such tenderness that she felt tears prick her eyes. This man, this wonderful man who had saved her at her lowest point, was now her husband. She was Josephine Mills, wife to Ethan, mother to Lily, and mistress of a ranch she had come to love. The early days of marriage were an adjustment. Ethan moved his things into Josephine's room, though he was so careful about her comfort and consent that she found herself falling even more in love with him. He was patient and gentle, understanding that she needed time to fully open her heart to physical intimacy after everything she had been through. But as the weeks passed, their bond deepened. Josephine had loved Thomas in the way of young first love, based on attraction and shared dreams but without deep foundation. Her love for Ethan was different, built on respect and friendship and genuine partnership. He consulted her on ranch decisions, valued her opinions, treated her as an equal partner in building their life together. Lily thrived in the loving household. She adored Ethan, reaching for him whenever he came into view, and he was devoted to her. He insisted on considering her his daughter in every way that mattered, refusing to make any distinction between her and any children they might have together. Those children came in time. A year after their wedding, Josephine gave birth to a boy they named Robert, after Ethan's stepfather. 2 years after that came twin girls, Alina and Grace. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now rang with children's laughter and the chaos of family life. Lily grew into a bright, confident girl who had no memory of the difficult circumstances of her early months. To her, Ethan was simply Papa, the man who had always been there, who loved her without reservation. She would grow up to become a teacher, like Josephine had once considered, running the school in Monticello with skill and dedication. Robert inherited his father's love of the land, eventually taking over management of the ranch and expanding it to become one of the most successful operations in the territory. The twins were as different as could be. Alina serious and studious, eventually becoming a doctor, and Grace wild and free-spirited, surprising everyone by becoming a skilled horsewoman and rancher in her own right. But all of that was still to come. In the early years of their marriage, Ethan and Josephine focused on building their family and their life together. They worked side by side, whether it was managing the ranch, raising the children, or simply sitting on the porch in the evenings watching the sun set over the mountains. 5 years after their wedding, Josephine stood in the kitchen of the ranch house making bread while Lily, now almost 6, helped by punching down the dough. Robert toddled around their feet, and the twins were asleep upstairs. Through the window she could see Ethan working with the horses in the corral, his movements easy and confident. "Mama, when will the bread be ready?" Lily asked, flour dusting her nose. "Another hour or so," Josephine said, smoothing back her daughter's hair. "Why don't you go play?" "I can finish this." Lily scampered off, and Josephine returned to kneading the dough, her hands moving in the familiar rhythm. She thought about how far she had come from that terrified woman standing on an auction block, how much her life had changed because of one man's kindness and one moment of fate. The door opened and Ethan came in, sweaty from his work. "Something smells good in here." "Just bread," Josephine said. "You're early. I wasn't expecting you for another hour. Finished with the horses sooner than I thought." He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Besides, I'd rather be here with you." Josephine leaned back against him, comfortable and content. "I was just thinking about the day we met, the auction." "That was the luckiest day of my life," Ethan said, pressing a kiss to her temple, "even if it was one of the worst days of yours." "I don't know," Josephine mused. "It brought me to you, brought me home. How can I regret that?" "Do you miss him?" Ethan asked quietly. "Thomas." It was a question he had asked before over the years, always with the same gentle understanding. Josephine considered it carefully, as she always did. "I miss who I was when I was with him," she said slowly. "Young and naive and believing life would always be easy. But I don't miss that life, not really. What I have with you is richer, deeper. We've built this together, earned it. That means more than anything else could." Ethan turned her in his arms so she faced him. His eyes, those blue-green eyes that had first caught her attention on that terrible day, were warm with love. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Josie Mills. Even better than this ranch you love so much," she teased. "The ranch is just land without you in it. You make it a home. You and the children, you're everything." She kissed him then, flour-covered hands and all, pouring into it all the love and gratitude and joy she felt. When they pulled apart, both smiling, Robert had toddled over and was tugging on Ethan's leg, demanding attention. "All right, little man," Ethan said, scooping up his son. "What do you want? You want to go see the horses?" Robert's face lit up and he nodded enthusiastically. Ethan looked at Josephine. "I'm going to take him out to the barn. Yell if you need me." "We'll be fine," Josephine assured him. "Take your time." She watched them go, her husband and son, warmth filling her chest. Through the window she could see Lily running in the yard, chasing one of the barn cats. Upstairs the twins were still sleeping peacefully. This was her life now, full and rich and exactly what she needed. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. The ranch prospered under Ethan's management, growing from a modest operation to a respected spread that provided well for the family. Josephine became known throughout Monticello as a gracious hostess and a pillar of the community, helping to establish a proper school and serving on various charitable committees. But it was in the quiet moments, the everyday rhythms of life, that Josephine found her greatest happiness. Making breakfast while Ethan read the newspaper and the children squabbled good-naturedly. Working in her garden while Lily helped and the younger children played nearby. Sitting on the porch in the evenings with Ethan, their hands intertwined, watching another sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised her with a trip to Salt Lake City, just the two of them while Jack and Samuel watched the children. It was the farthest Josephine had traveled since coming to Utah Territory, and she enjoyed every moment of exploring the growing city with her husband. On their last night, over dinner in a fine restaurant, Ethan raised his glass to toast her. "To 10 years with the most remarkable woman I've ever known. To 10 more and 10 after that, and all the years God grants us." "To us," Josephine agreed, clinking her glass against his. And to that day in Monticello when you decided to bid on a desperate widow and her baby. Best $200 I ever spent, Ethan said with a grin. Only $200. I would think I'd be worth more than that by now, Josephine teased. You're priceless, Ethan said, his tone turning serious. Then and now and always. You and our children are my whole world, Josie. Back at the ranch, life continued its pleasant pace. Lily started helping Josephine teach reading and writing to her younger siblings, showing a natural aptitude that would serve her well in her future career. Robert was fascinated by everything about ranching, following Ethan and the hands around whenever he was allowed. The twins developed their distinct personalities, Alina with her quiet intelligence and Grace with her adventurous spirit. There were challenges, of course. The drought year when they almost lost the ranch and had to sell off half the herd. The winter when all the children came down with influenza and Josephine and Ethan spent sleepless nights nursing them through fevers. The day Jack died suddenly, leaving a hole in their ranch family that took years to heal. But through it all, Ethan and Josephine faced everything as partners, their love deepening with each shared trial and triumph. They grew older together, silver starting to thread through their hair, laugh lines deepening around their eyes, but the way they looked at each other never changed. On their 20th anniversary, the children threw them a surprise party. Lily, now a young woman of 20, organized everything. Robert, a strapping young man of 18, barbecued meat over an open pit. The twins, nearly 16, decorated the house and yard with ribbons and flowers. Friends and neighbors came from all over. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house, now elderly but still sharp. The Jensen family from the mercantile. Other ranchers and townspeople who had watched Ethan and Josephine's love story unfold over the decades. Even Samuel, retired now but still living in a cabin on the ranch property, made an appearance. Standing in the yard surrounded by family and friends, Josephine felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She thought about the woman she had been 20 years ago, standing on that auction block with Lily in her arms, believing her life was over. She could never have imagined this future. A thriving family, a beautiful home, a community that respected her, and most importantly, a love that had sustained her through 2 decades of life's joys and sorrows. Ethan found her standing alone for a moment, watching the party from the porch. "You all right?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "More than all right," Josephine said, leaning into him. "I was just thinking about how blessed I am, how blessed we are. It's been a good 20 years, Ethan agreed. Best of my life, mine too." She turned to look up at him. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't bid on that contract? If someone else had bought it?" "I try not to think about it," Ethan admitted. "The idea of you belonging to anyone else makes me crazy, even in hypothetical." "I don't think I ever really belonged to anyone but you," Josephine said softly. "From the moment you said you both belong with me now, I think my heart knew. It just took time for the rest of me to catch up." He kissed her then, tender and sweet despite the decades between them. Some of their guests noticed and cheered, making them both laugh as they pulled apart. "Come on," Ethan said, taking her hand. "Our children went to all this trouble. We should enjoy it." They rejoined the party, dancing together to the music someone had started playing, eating the food, laughing with friends. Later, after the guests had gone home and the children were in bed, Ethan and Josephine sat on their porch as they had thousands of times before. "You know what I think about sometimes," Ethan said into the comfortable silence. "I think about what Robert told me before he died, that the best thing he ever did was help my mother, that it led to the best parts of his life. I understand that now. Helping you, loving you, building this life with you, it's the best thing I ever did." "You saved me," Josephine said simply. "You and Lily, you gave us everything. You gave me just as much. You made this house a home. You gave me a family. You showed me what real love looks like." He squeezed her hand. "We saved each other, Josie." As they sat together watching the stars come out, Josephine reflected on the strange path that had led her here. The tragedy of losing Thomas, the humiliation of the auction, the fear of an uncertain future. All of it had been necessary, she realized, to bring her to this moment, this life, this love. She had been auctioned with her baby, and a cowboy had said they both belonged with him. It could have been a nightmare. Instead, it had been the beginning of the greatest blessing of her life. The years continued to roll by. Lily married a good man, a doctor who had come to Monticello to open a practice. They gave Ethan and Josephine their first grandchildren, twin boys who were as wild and energetic as their mother had been calm. Robert married his childhood sweetheart, and they built a house on the edge of the ranch property, continuing the legacy Ethan had started. Alina went back east for medical school, eventually returning to set up practice in Salt Lake City. Grace shocked everyone by marrying a rodeo rider, but they were happy together, traveling the circuit before eventually settling on a ranch of their own in Montana. Through it all, the ranch house remained the heart of the family. Holidays brought everyone home, filling the rooms with laughter and chaos. Grandchildren ran through the halls where Josephine's children had once played. The vegetable garden she had started decades ago continued to produce, tended now by a new generation. Ethan and Josephine grew old together, their bodies slowing but their love constant. They still sat on the porch in the evenings when weather permitted, hands intertwined, comfortable in the silence of two people who knew each other completely. On the morning of their 40th wedding anniversary, Josephine woke to find Ethan already dressed, sitting in the chair by the window. At 72, he moved slower than he once had, his hair completely white, his face deeply lined. But when he looked at her, his eyes held the same warmth they had held when he first bid on her contract. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, just as he had every morning for 40 years. "Good morning yourself," Josephine replied, stretching. At 62, she felt the years in her joints and bones, but she had no regrets. Every line on her face had been earned through laughter or tears, all of them part of the rich tapestry of their life together. "I have something for you," Ethan said, producing a wrapped package. "You didn't need to get me anything," Josephine protested, though she was already reaching for it. Inside was a photograph in a beautiful frame. It showed the two of them on their wedding day, young and hopeful, standing in front of the church. Josephine's eyes filled with tears as she looked at it. "Where did you find this?" she asked. "I thought we'd lost it years ago. I had it tucked away safe. I wanted to surprise you." Ethan moved to sit beside her on the bed. "Look at us. We were so young." "We had no idea what we were getting into," Josephine said with a watery laugh. "Would you do it again, knowing everything that was ahead? Every heartache, every challenge, every moment of joy? Yes, without hesitation." She set the photograph aside and took his hands in hers. "You are the love of my life, Ethan Mills. These 40 years have been the greatest gift. The feeling is entirely mutual, Mrs. Mills." Later that day, the family gathered once again to celebrate. The house overflowed with children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. There was food and music and laughter, the sound of a family that loved each other deeply. At one point, Lily pulled her mother aside. Now 40 years old herself with children of her own, she looked at Josephine with understanding. "You know I don't remember anything before coming to the ranch," she said. "Papa is the only father I've ever known, but I wanted to tell you that I understand what you went through to get us here, and I'm grateful." Josephine hugged her eldest daughter tight. You were my strength in those dark days. You and Ethan, you both saved me." As the evening wound down and the family began to depart, Josephine stood on the porch watching them go. 4 children, 12 grandchildren, 3 great-grandchildren so far. All of them here because of choices made 40 years ago, because of one man's kindness and one woman's courage. Ethan joined her, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cooling evening air. "Quite a legacy we've built." "Not bad for a woman who was auctioned in the street," Josephine agreed. "Not bad for a cowboy who couldn't resist a damsel in distress," Ethan countered. They stood together as the last of the wagons disappeared down the road, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold. The ranch stretched out around them, the land they had worked and loved, the home they had built together. Ethan Mills had bid $200 for a labor contract and got a family instead. Josephine Kane had stood on an auction block in despair and found love instead. Together they had created a life neither could have imagined, proof that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the greatest blessings. As they turned to go back inside, Ethan paused. "Do you remember what I said to you that first day, at the boarding house? You said a lot of things that day. I said you both belong with me now. I meant it then and I mean it now, Josie. You and Lily, you belonged with me from that very first moment." "And you belonged with us," Josephine replied. "You always will." They walked into the house together, leaving the door open behind them to let in the cool evening breeze. The home they had built together would stand for generations, a testament to the love that had started on a desperate day in Monticello and grown into something beautiful and lasting. Years later, when the ranch passed to Robert and his children, when Ethan and Josephine were long gone but their love story lived on in family memory, people would still talk about the auction day. About the cowboy who paid too much for a widow's contract and got the love of his life instead. About the woman who stood on a platform with her baby and found salvation in the form of a blue-eyed rancher. But that was all still to come. On that 40th anniversary evening, Ethan and Josephine simply sat together in the home they had made, surrounded by the echoes of their children's laughter, grateful for every moment they had been given. The auction had been the worst day of Josephine's life and the best day, both at once. It had taken everything from her and given her everything, all in the span of a few terrible and wonderful moments. And through it all, through 40 years of marriage and a lifetime of love, one truth remained constant. She and Lily belonged with Ethan Mills, and he belonged with them, exactly as it was always meant to be.